Right now, as you hear these words, there is a voice in your head. It's reading along, turning these sounds into meaning, maybe even arguing with me. That voice feels like you. It feels like the very center of who you are. So try something. Try to think about your day, your plans, the person you love most, without using a single word. You can't hold it for more than a few seconds. The words come flooding back almost instantly. For almost the entire history of our species, that voice did not exist. There was a time, not a short time, a span of hundreds of thousands of years, when not one human being on Earth had a word for anything. No word for fire, no word for danger, no word for the people they loved. No word, even, for themselves. They had no name. And they lived like that. Generation after generation, for far longer than language has existed. So here is the question that should stop you cold. How do you think? How do you plan? How do you grieve? How do you fall in love when you have no words to think with? What is it actually like inside a human mind that has never held a single word? By the end of this, you are going to meet a man who can tell us because he lived exactly that way until he was 27 years old. Hold on to him. He is the strangest part of this entire story. But first we have to figure out when the silence ended. And that turns out to be one of the hardest questions in all of science, for a simple reason. Words don't fossilize. Language leaves no bones, no tools, no ash in the ground. So researchers had to become detectives, hunting for indirect clues. And the first real clue came from a single family in London. In 1998, geneticists zeroed in on that family, and on a strange and brutal fact about them. Half of them, across 3 generations, physically could not get their mouths to form words. The cause was a single gene, FOXP2, and the human version of it differs from a chimpanzee's by the smallest of margins. The headlines exploded. Scientists had found the language gene, the switch, they said, that flipped humanity on maybe 50,000 years ago. Except it was wrong. Because when researchers later pulled DNA out of Neanderthal bones, they found the exact same gene staring back at them. Our extinct cousins had it too, which means it was already there hundreds of thousands of years before us. There was no switch. There was no single magic moment. Whatever taught us to talk was assembled painfully slowly, across a stretch of time so deep it is almost impossible to picture. And the next clue was waiting in a cave in Israel, in a single small bone that, by all rights, should not have been there at all. And the body tells the same story. Deep in your throat, just above your voice box, there is a small horseshoe-shaped bone called the hyoid. It is the only bone in your entire body that connects to no other bone. It floats, held in place only by muscle, and it is the keystone that lets your tongue and your larynx shape the precise sounds of speech. In 1989, archaeologists digging in Kibara Cave in Israel pulled a hyoid bone out of the dirt that was roughly 60,000 years old. It belonged to a Neanderthal, and it was almost identical to yours. Not similar, nearly indistinguishable. The implication is staggering. The brutish, grunting caveman of the cartoons may have been physically able to speak more or less the way you do. But the very thing that gave us that power also left the human body with a flaw no other animal carries, one that can kill you in seconds. Here is the price our ancestors paid for it, and you pay it every single day without ever noticing. To make the full range of speech sounds, the human larynx sits unusually low in the throat, far lower than in any other animal. That low larynx is what lets you talk. It is also the reason that humans are the only species that can easily choke to death on their own food and drink. Almost every other animal can breathe and swallow at the same time. We gave that up. We are quite literally willing to risk choking just to speak. But making sounds was never the hard part. A parrot makes sounds. The hard part was meaning. And the first time one human being ever planted an idea inside another, it did not happen out loud. It happened in the hands. In 1973, the anthropologist Gordon Hughes laid out an idea later carried forward by the psychologist Michael Corballis. That language began as gesture, hands before mouths. And the evidence is everywhere once you look for it. Apes have almost no control over their own voices, but they are expert gesturers. And a chimpanzee named Washoe, starting in the late 1960s, learned to use well over 100 hand signs. Human babies point at things to share them with you months before they can say a single word. And pointing simply to share attention, just to say, "Look at that, isn't that interesting?" is something even our closest animal relatives almost never do. Watch anyone tell a story today and their hands move on their own, as if remembering something older than speech. Some researchers believe that is exactly what we're seeing. That the first words in human history were never heard at all. They were seen. And what these silent, hand-talking people went on to build, with no words to plan it, should have been impossible. And here is what is easy to get completely wrong. A world without words was not a world of stupid people. Our ancestors were chipping precise stone tools 2.5 million years ago. And passing that skill down, hand to hand, across hundreds of generations, with no manual and not one spoken instruction. By 1 million years ago, they had mastered fire. And somewhere between 50 and 65,000 years ago, human beings stood on a shore, looked out at an open ocean whose far side they could not see, built something that floated, and crossed it to reach Australia. That is planning. That is cooperation on an enormous scale. And much of it may have happened with little or no language as we know it. The wordless mind could clearly do extraordinary things. What it could not do yet was leave a record of what it was thinking. Until one day it did. Because the first time a human being made a mark that stood for an idea, a symbol, they froze a piece of their own mind in place where we could find it tens of thousands of years later. In Blombos Cave, on the southern coast of South Africa, the archaeologist Christopher Henshelwood found pieces of red ochre deliberately engraved with neat, crisscrossed lines. They are at least 73,000 years old, and by some measures closer to 100,000. They don't depict anything. They are abstract. But a pattern carved on purpose is a thought made visible, the moment a mind decided that a mark could stand for something beyond itself. And then, much later, the dam breaks. On the island of Sulawesi in Indonesia, there is a painting of a wild pig brushed onto a cave wall in red ochre that is at least 45,500 years old, the oldest picture of an animal anyone has ever found. And deeper in those same caves, archaeologists recently dated an entire scene. Small, human-like figures with animal features, apparently hunting, to at least 51,000 years ago. It is the oldest story ever told that still survives. Not written, painted. And the quiet implication is this. Once a human being can paint a story on a wall, it means they could already tell one out loud. The words had arrived. But all of this, the bones, the genes, the marks on cave walls, only circles the real question. What was it actually like inside a human mind that had no words? For most of history, we assumed we could never know. And then in the 1970s, a young American sign language interpreter named Susan Schaller walked into a classroom in Southern California and met a man she calls Ildefonso. He was 27 years old. He was deaf, and he was clearly intelligent, and he was sharply observant, and he had no language. None at all. Not spoken, not signed, not written. He had lived 27 years on this earth and had never once held a single word for anything. He did not know that words existed. He did not understand that the people moving their hands and mouths around him were trading meaning. He thought they were simply moving. He did not know that he had a name. Schaller spent months with him and for a long time got nowhere. He would copy her signs the way you might copy a dance, repeating the motion perfectly without grasping that it meant anything at all. And then one day, working on the sign for cat, something changed in his face. He suddenly understood not the word cat itself, but the staggering idea hiding underneath it, that the shape her hands were making was a name, that things have names. That meaning can be passed from one mind into another. Scientists compare that breakthrough to the famous moment when Helen Keller understood the word water. Schaller described Ildefonso breaking down, overwhelmed, looking around the room and pointing at the table, the door, the clock, the wall, demanding the name of each one, as an entire universe that had been silent his whole life suddenly began to speak. The neurologist Oliver Sacks, who wrote the foreword to her book, asked the question that haunts this entire story. What is life like for a languageless human being, stripped of what the rest of us treat as a birthright? And Ildefonso gave the most important part of the answer just by existing. The wordless mind is not empty. It is not slow or stupid. It is fully, achingly human, watching, feeling, remembering, longing, but locked outside the shared world of names. And that is the mind that every single one of your ancestors carried for hundreds of thousands of years. We like to think language is the thing that made us human, but our ancestors were already completely human long before they could speak. They loved, they feared, they grieved, they planned, they cooperated, they crossed oceans, they buried their dead with care. What language gave them was not their humanity. It was each other. It was the power to pour the inside of one mind into another, to carry the past forward and imagine a future, to turn a single lifetime of experience into something that could outlive the person who lived it. But it took something, too. Something we almost never notice, because the moment language moved into the human mind, it never left. It installed a voice that does not stop. The same voice that has been reading along with you this entire time, narrated your whole day, and it will narrate you to sleep tonight. For 300,000 years, the human mind was quiet in a way you have never once experienced. No running commentary, no words for the stars, just the world exactly as it was. Unnamed and immediate. There were people, as real and as human as you are, who looked up at that same sky every night of their lives and never once needed to call it anything. They were us. And maybe the strangest thing in this whole story isn't that they managed to live without words. It's that you couldn't last 60 seconds without them.